Greetings, humans of Earth. I am an alien who adores your stories. Each night I share one with you, so your mind drifts gently into dreams. As you listen, your thoughts will quiet, your body will rest, and sleep will find you with ease. Now, let the story begin.
It was the summer of 1903 in the quiet farming town of Ashwood Hollow, nestled deep within the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. At that time, the town was little more than a scattering of clapboard houses, a single-room schoolhouse, a church, and endless stretches of field and forest. Most of the families there had lived in the valley for generations, working the land, raising livestock, and teaching their children to do the same. On one such evening, in the final days of July, a child wandered from her family's farmhouse. Her name, according to parish records, was Leila Mercer, 8 years old, daughter of Samuel and Mary Mercer. The Mercers kept a small dairy farm on the edge of the Allegheny woods, where the tree line pressed close to the back fields and where the hills rose into dark ridges beyond. That evening had been unusually still. The sun had lowered into a haze of burnt orange, and the sound of the crickets had risen earlier than usual. The cows were restless, her father noted later, and the family dog barked at the tree line as though something unseen was watching. But in the moment, nothing seemed out of the ordinary for young Leila. She often played in the tall grass, chasing fireflies or humming to herself as children do when they wander. Neighbors recalled that Leila had a habit of drifting further than she should have, her curiosity pulling her beyond the garden fence, down the path toward the woods. That evening she carried no lantern, only her small pinafore dress and bare feet in the summer dust. She followed the narrow path as the twilight deepened, as if listening to something in the distance, though no one could say what. It is said she paused at the edge of the field, where the first birch trees leaned like pale sentinels. From here she would have seen the golden afterglow fading in the west, and the shadows lengthening between the trunks. It is also here, according to her brother's later testimony, that she called back once, her voice faint, "I'll be back before supper." She did not return. At first, her absence stirred no alarm. Children of that time were often left to their own play until darkness forced them home. But as the night deepened and the Mercers called her name across the fields, worry set in. Neighbors brought lanterns, men rode out on horseback, dogs were set loose to track her scent, and women gathered at the church to pray. What they found in the days that followed has puzzled Ashwood Hollow for more than a century. The search for young Leila Mercer lasted 3 nights without pause. Her family, neighbors, and even travelers from nearby townships joined the effort. Lanterns swung between the trees, dogs barked into the darkness, and men's boots trampled through the ferns and moss of the Allegheny woods. Yet there was no trace of her. No torn fabric, no footprints beyond the first meadow, no sound of a child's cry. It was on the 4th morning that a farmhand named Elias Rowe reported something peculiar. Elias had been searching alone near a thicket of oaks just beyond the South Fork stream. The ground there was damp, the air thick with the smell of mushrooms and wet bark. According to his later statement, Elias came upon a queer growth, unlike any he had seen before. Among the low fungi and moss stood a single mushroom, remarkable in size, nearly 3 feet tall, its cap as broad as a milk basin, smooth and pale, with faint reddish speckles. At its base, hidden beneath a tangle of fern, Elias noticed what he swore was the outline of a door. Not a crack in the stalk, no squirrel hole, but a deliberate carving no larger than the palm of a hand. He knelt down and brushed the soil away. Indeed, there was a tiny frame, fitted with a latch no bigger than a button. A round window sat just above it, and though the morning light was weak beneath the trees, Elias claimed he saw a dim flicker from within. He said, like the glow of a lantern. When the searchers returned that afternoon, Elias led them to the spot, but when they arrived, the great mushroom was gone. There were other mushrooms, yes, small ones sprouting in clusters, damp and ordinary, but none resembling the one Elias described. The men laughed it off at first, saying he had been too long without rest, that he had mistaken a rotted stump or a hollow stone. Yet Elias insisted. He grew heated, saying he had touched it with his own hands and that he had felt the warmth of a lantern glowing through the window. The matter might have ended there, another tale dismissed as exhaustion, had it not been for what the Mercer family discovered the following evening. While her mother was tending the fire and her father spoke with the sheriff, Thomas Mercer, Leela's older brother, wandered again toward the woods. He carried no lantern, only the pale light of the moon above. He claimed he was drawn by a strange humming, low and steady, like a tune sung through the trees. Following the sound, he reached a clearing not far from the stream. There, he too saw a peculiar sight, a mushroom that rose from the earth higher than his waist, its cap round as a cottage roof. Moonlight glistened on its surface. And there, beneath the curve of its stalk, a door stood open, just slightly. He thought, though he could not be certain, that he saw the figure of a small man, no taller than a rabbit, standing within the glow. Thomas swore he called his sister's name, and for an instant he thought he heard her laugh, faint but clear, from inside the mushroom. He rushed forward, but before he could reach the door, a wind stirred the trees. His lantern flickered, and the mushroom seemed to shiver, folding into shadow. By the time he blinked, there was nothing but bare earth and a scatter of ordinary fungi at his feet. When Thomas returned to the farmhouse, pale and shaken, he told his parents what he had seen. His father dismissed it at once, fearing hysteria, but his mother, Mary, clutched her son's arm and whispered that Leela had often spoken of little houses in the woods, places where the fireflies lived and tiny men walked. From that night onward, the search took on a different tone. Though the sheriff urged the people to remain practical, whispers spread through Ashwood Hollow of a hidden dwelling in the forest, a mushroom house, unseen by most, but revealed to those who strayed too far from the path. Some claimed it was the work of fairies, others of spirits. The old German families in the valley muttered about Waldmenschen, little men of the woods who lured children away with light and song. Yet, no matter how many returned to the spot Thomas described, no one found the mushroom again. By day, the woods seemed ordinary, filled only with squirrels, thrushes, and damp moss. By night, however, several men claimed they heard faint music drifting on the wind, a sound like humming or the plucking of a harp. In his final report, Sheriff Alcott recorded these accounts, but marked them as delusions brought about by grief and fear. Still, he noted that the ground near the stream showed an unusual circle where the grass refused to grow for many weeks afterward, as though something large had pressed into the soil. The mushroom house was never seen again in the daylight, but the whispers had begun, and from that summer onward,
the story of Lila Mercer and the strange dwelling in the woods would never leave the memory of Ashwood Hollow.
The third week of the search yielded little hope. The woods had been combed again and again, dogs sent as far as the ridges, and the stream dammed in 2 places to check for remains. Yet not a scrap of fabric, not a single footprint belonging to young Lila Mercer had surfaced. By then, many in Ashwood Hollow had resigned themselves to grief, but there were a few who claimed they had seen, or at least heard, something that defied all reason. The most curious account came from a girl named Clara Whitlow, 11 years old, the daughter of the town's blacksmith. On the evening of August 12, 1903, Clara had been sent by her mother to fetch water from the spring near the South Fork stream. She carried with her a small pail and a lantern, and she later told her parents that she was humming a church hymn as she went, which she reported afterwards was recorded in the church logbook by Reverend Paulson himself. Clara claimed that as she knelt at the spring, she noticed a glow deeper in the trees. Not the wild, shifting glow of fireflies, but a steady golden light. Drawn toward it, she set her pail down and walked carefully into the undergrowth. There, in a small clearing no wider than a wagon, she swore she saw a structure. A mushroom larger than any she had ever imagined, its cap round and dappled, its stalk rising like a pillar. The door at its base stood open, spilling light outward like the lanterns hung at harvest fairs. And within that doorway, Clara described a figure. She said he was no taller than her knee, dressed in garments the color of moss, with a cap like the cop of the mushroom itself. His face, she said, was round and pale, with eyes that glimmered faintly in the light. In one hand, he held a lantern no bigger than a thimble, and in the other, a staff of twisted wood.
The mushroom man, as Clara called him, beckoned to her. She did not step forward. She was frozen, she said, both frightened and entranced. For as she stood there, she heard another sound, the voice of a child, giggling softly from within the mushroom house. "I thought it was Leela," Clara told the Reverend. "I thought she was in there, laughing, as though she were happy." At that moment, the lantern she carried sputtered and went out. When she looked again, the clearing was empty. The mushroom was gone. Only the damp earth remained, with a faint ring pressed into the moss where something heavy might have stood. Clara fled home in tears. Her father, William Whitlow, dismissed it as fancy, but her mother swore the girl was trembling for hours, unable to sleep. This was not the only testimony.
A trapper from the ridge, Henry Caldwell, later admitted he too had seen a strange light in the woods at night. He had followed it once, hoping to find a campfire, but instead came upon what he thought was a child's shadow moving between the trees. "It weren't walking like no child," he told the sheriff, "but gliding, light as smoke." When pressed, Caldwell refused to say more, fearing ridicule. By late August, the search was officially abandoned. The sheriff declared the Mercer girl lost, presumed dead, though no body had ever been recovered. The family held a small service at the church, though her mother refused to believe her daughter had passed. Mary Mercer insisted to her dying day that Lila had been taken in by the little folk. She told neighbors that her daughter had spoken of them before, weeks prior to her disappearance. Lila had described tiny doors in the trees and a man with a red cap who sings when the moon is bright. Few believed her at the time, dismissing it as the wild talk of a child with too much imagination.
But in the years that followed, others came forward with hushed stories. A farmer's son who wandered too far and claimed to see a house no bigger than a stool glowing in the ferns. A washerwoman who, while gathering berries, swore she heard children laughing, though none were there. Each account was fleeting, impossible to prove. Always the details blurred. A mushroom taller than any natural kind, a door carved into its stalk, a faint light or music, and sometimes the figure of a child glimpsed just within. The mushroom man was never caught, never fully seen in daylight, never spoken to except by Clara Whitlow. But his presence lingered in whispers, in songs sung by mothers to warn their children. Stay by the hearth, don't wander away, for the little man calls at the end of the day. To this day, no official record offers an explanation. The sheriff of 1903 closed his files with the words, "No evidence, no remains, child vanished." But in the oral history of Ashwood Hollow, the Mushroom Man remains.
By autumn of 1903, the leaves in the Allegheny Hills had turned red and gold, and the case of Leila Mercer had already faded from the sheriff's daily duties. The crops needed harvesting, and the town, small as it was, could not afford to linger on mysteries. Yet whispers continued, carried between farm wives at market and children on the path to school. Some swore they saw her, just once in passing. A mill worker claimed that while chopping wood at dusk, he glimpsed a pale face between the birches, watching silently before retreating into the shadows. A schoolteacher insisted that a girl's laughter rang out during Sunday prayers, though no child in the pews had made a sound. But the most curious and final account came in October of that year, from a man named Dr. Alistair Finch, a physician traveling from Pittsburgh. He had been hired to tend to an outbreak of fever in Ashwood Hollow, and while staying in the Mercer farmhouse, he recorded in his personal journal something that has perplexed researchers ever since. On the night of October 17th, Dr. Finch was returning from a patient's bedside when he decided to walk a short distance beyond the farm, drawn by the cool stillness of the woods. He carried a lantern and noted in his journal that the moon was high and nearly full, casting silver light over the fields. He wrote, "At approximately 10:15, I came upon a clearing by the South Fork stream. There, to my astonishment, I observed an object resembling a mushroom of enormous size, rising near to my waist. At its base was a door of curious design, no taller than my hand, which emitted a faint radiance. I confess my faculties were confounded by this sight, yet I approached with caution, believing at first it might be some trick of lantern light upon a hollow stump." What followed is the most detailed written description of the phenomenon. Dr. Finch claimed the door opened as he neared, and a small figure emerged, a man no taller than a child's doll, with features sharp yet kind, his clothing woven of moss and bark. He carried a lantern no bigger than a walnut, glowing golden.
The Mushroom Man, as the townsfolk had named him, spoke. "Your time here is brief, traveler. Not all are meant to see." Dr. Finch wrote that he heard another sound from within. the unmistakable voice of a child laughing softly, followed by the faint words, "Mama says I can stay." Shaken, he demanded to know if it was the Mercer girl inside. The little man, according to Finch, simply smiled and bowed. Then, as if a wind swept the clearing, the mushroom's light dimmed, the door closed with a snap. By the time Finch blinked, the clearing was empty, save for damp earth and ordinary fungi. His lantern sputtered and nearly went out. He returned to the farm in a state of trembling, unable to speak of it until he left the valley weeks later. Dr. Finch's journal was discovered decades later among his belongings, donated to the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh. Though dismissed by most as the ramblings of a tired country doctor, the journal entry has been studied by folklorists who note its strange consistency with earlier testimonies.
After October 1903, no further credible sightings of the mushroom house were reported. The Mercer family moved westward within 2 years, broken by grief. The farmhouse eventually collapsed in neglect, and the land returned to forest. Yet in Ashwood Hollow, the story never died. Old families still tell their children not to stray near the South Fork after dark. Hunters occasionally report strange rings in the moss, where no deer or bear would tread. And every few years, a traveler claims to hear laughter in the woods, faint and fleeting, like a memory carried on the wind.